Welcome to the Echoes of Ihsan podcast, where we uncover the wisdom that's tucked away in Islamic tradition.
That's right. We're going deep, not just, skimming the surface.
And today, we're going back in time to the early days of Islam. You know, those bustling marketplaces and those close-knit communities that were around back then to understand how wages and earnings were viewed, through a spiritual lens.
Yeah, we're going to be cracking open Sunan Abu Dawud, specifically book 17, which is all about wages.
So imagine you're back then, not just browsing goods,
Mm.
but figuring out what kind of work, what transactions were even considered, right?
Yeah.
By Islamic principles.
Yeah, and it's such a fascinating mix of practicality and deep ethics.
Yeah, I was really surprised by how specific some of the rulings were.
Oh, absolutely. And what's even more interesting is how much these ancient guidelines still resonate today.
Yeah.
It's about fairness, social responsibility. These are ideas that are timeless.
Definitely, to get us started, let's set the scene. What was the economic landscape like back then?
Well, early Islamic society thrived on trade, but it wasn't just about profit, though the marketplace was really like the heart of the community. Newsprint deals were struck, scholars debated. It was a very dynamic place to be.
So within that energetic environment, Islam sought to bring a sense of justice, particularly when it came to, how people earn their living.
Exactly, and that's where Sunan Abu Dawud comes in. These hadith, these accounts of the Prophet Muhammad's sayings and actions, give us incredible insight into what was deemed permissible or halal and what was forbidden haram in terms of earnings.
One of the first things that jumped out at me was the concept of forbidden earnings. There's a story about Ubaidah ibn Samit, who was gifted a bow for teaching.
Right. Ubada was teaching people how to write and reciting the Quran, and a grateful student wanted to show their appreciation with this gift of a bow. But Ubada, being deeply devout, wasn't sure if accepting it was the right thing to do. So he sought guidance from the Prophet.
And the Prophet was pretty clear that taking the bow would be like wearing a necklace of fire, which is a pretty powerful image.
It really underscores the importance of keeping religious instruction pure, free from the taint of worldly gain. Imagine if knowledge just became another commodity to be bought and sold. The potential for exploitation, the potential for insincere motivations, it's huge.
So was accepting Amy Way payment for teaching religious subjects totally off limits?
Generally, yes. The idea was to safeguard the sanctity of knowledge and ensure that it flowed freely within the community. But there's this other hadith about Alqa ibn Sahar at Tamimi who used Surah al-Fatiha, a chapter from the Quran, to heal someone suffering from mental illness.
And he was allowed to accept payment for that, right?
He was, and it highlights a really crucial distinction. The focus is on the intention and the nature of the service. If you're genuinely using your knowledge to benefit others, to alleviate suffering, then accepting compensation can be justified. It's when knowledge is used for personal gain or exploitation that it becomes problematic.
So it's not about these rigid rules, but rather about guiding principles for ethical conduct.
Precisely, the context really matters. Take cupping, for instance. It was a common medical practice back then, but the hadith mentions that the earnings of a cupper are considered impure, meaning they're haram.
So was cupping itself forbidden?
Well, it seems more nuanced than that. The concern was likely about individuals performing cupping without proper qualifications, potentially harming patients. It's like any profession where you need expertise and ethical standards to avoid causing harm.
That makes sense. And then there's the hadith about the price paid for a dog being impure. Why was that?
Well, dogs were considered unclean in that culture, so discouraging their sale was likely a way to prevent their association with impurity. Now, of course, cultural views have evolved, but it's a reminder that ethical considerations are often intertwined with the values and norms of a particular society.
And the prohibition on earnings from prostitution, that's fairly straightforward, right?
Yes, it reflects the Islamic emphasis on chastity, the sanctity of marriage and family. Prostitution was seen as exploitative and detrimental to the moral fabric of society.
But I did notice an interesting exception. There's a hadith that mentions someone using earnings from cupping to feed their working animal or slave.
That's a fascinating example of pragmatism within Islamic jurisprudence. While earnings from cupping were generally frowned upon, there was this recognition of basic needs. If someone's livelihood depended on cupping, and they used those earnings to care for their dependents or animals, there was some leniency.
It speaks to the flexibility of Islamic law, its ability to consider individual circumstances while still upholding moral principles.
Exactly. It's a beautiful balance. The core message is to promote ethical conduct in every aspect of life, but also to acknowledge the realities of human situations and allow for compassion within those boundaries.
Yeah, it's like a tapestry that's woven with both idealism and pragmatism.
That's a great way to put it. It's not just about rules, but about guiding us towards living just and compassionate lives, even in the most complex of circumstances.
So far, we've been focusing on what was considered off-limits, but Sunan Abu Dawud also provides guidelines for what was considered permissible and how trade should be conducted ethically.
That's where things get really interesting. You can see how Islam aimed to create a just economic system centuries ahead of its time.
Let's dive into that in part two. But first, I'm curious what stands out to you the most about these forbidden earnings from early Islam. What's resonating with you?
Well, what strikes me is how intentional these rulings were about protecting those who are most vulnerable in a society.
Like setting up safeguards, not just assuming everyone starts on equal footing.
Exactly. Take, for instance, the hadith that forbids townspeople from acting as intermediaries in sales for people coming in from the desert.
That seems pretty specific. Why single out those folks?
Well, imagine you're a nomad, you're unfamiliar with the market prices in a big city. Someone from the town could easily take advantage of that, driving up the price or selling you something that's not good quality.
So it's about preventing exploitation, recognizing that not everyone has the same level of, market savvy or bargaining power.
Precisely. It's about creating a level playing field, making sure that transactions are fair and that no one is taken advantage of simply because they're an outsider or they lack experience.
And there's a similar concern for protecting those who are dependent on others, like in the Hadith, that forbids selling a slave's belongings without a clear agreement.
That's a powerful example. Slaves, by definition, had limited control over their possessions. This ruling safeguards their rights, ensures that their belongings aren't just sold off without their consent or knowledge.
It's acknowledging the power imbalance that's inherent in that relationship and setting up a legal framework to prevent abuse.
Right. It's a reminder that ethical conduct extends beyond just the buyer and seller. It includes considering the well-being of all those who are affected by a transaction, even if they're not directly involved.
Like a ripple effect of responsibility, considering the wider social impact of our actions.
Exactly. And this commitment to fairness and transparency is also evident in the hadith that addresses price fixing. Remember the story of someone asking the prophet to set fixed prices for goods?
And he refused, right?
Yeah.
Saying that God determines prices through supply and demand.
That's the one. It's a profound statement emphasizing that market forces, while seemingly chaotic, ultimately operate within a divinely ordained system. Interfering with those forces, trying to manipulate prices for personal gain, is seen as going against the natural order.
So it's about trusting that the market, when left to its own devices, will find a balance, a fair price that reflects the true value of goods and services.
Yes, and this hadith also serves as a warning against hoarding or creating artificial scarcity to drive up prices. That kind of manipulation ultimately harms the entire community.
It's interesting how these ancient teachings anticipated some of the challenges we face in modern economies. We have laws against monopolies and price fixing for the very reasons highlighted in these hadiths. They disrupt the natural flow of the market and often lead to exploitation.
Absolutely. It speaks to the timelessness of these principles. The idea that markets should be fair, transparent, and accessible to all is just as relevant today as it was centuries ago.
Now, one concept that really intrigued me was this idea of khiyar.
Ah, yes, the option in Islamic law. It's a fascinating mechanism that protects both the buyer and the seller.
So how does it work?
Essentially, both parties have the right to annul a sale as long as they haven't separated.
So imagine you're in the marketplace, you agree to buy a camel, but as you're walking away, you realize you've overpaid, or maybe the camel has a limp you didn't notice before.
With Kiar, you have the right to go back to the seller and renegotiate the price or even cancel the sale altogether as long as you haven't taken possession of the camel and left the marketplace.
That's amazing. It encourages thoughtful consideration, prevents hasty decisions, and creates a sense of trust between buyers and sellers, knowing that they have this safety net.
Exactly. There are stories in the Hadith that illustrate how this principle was applied. Remember the one about Abu Barza arbitrating a dispute over a horse sale?
Yeah, that's a great example. The seller had a change of heart, wanted his horse back even though the buyer was ready to pay. And Abu Barza, drawing on the Prophet's teachings, sided with the seller because they were still within the time frame of khiyar.
It highlights how Islamic law prioritizes mutual consent and fairness. It recognizes that emotions can play a role in transactions and allows for some flexibility to ensure that both parties feel good about the deal.
So khiyar isn't just a legal technicality. It's a way to promote ethical and harmonious business practices. It prevents buyers from feeling pressured and sellers from feeling like they've been taken advantage of.
Precisely. It's
Yeah.
a beautiful example of how Islamic law weaves ethical considerations into the very fabric of transactions.
Now, along with fairness and transparency, there's a strong emphasis on prohibiting deception. It seems like honesty is absolute paramount in Islamic business ethics.
Absolutely. There is a hadith that explicitly forbids selling goods one doesn't yet possess.
Like a timeless warning against making promises you can't keep.
Exactly. It's about ensuring that transactions are based on reality, not on speculation or empty promises. You can't sell something you don't actually have.
Right, it prevents all sorts of shady dealings where someone might try to profit from something that doesn't even exist.
And there's this heartwarming story about a man with weak intellect who came to the Prophet seeking advice on how to conduct his business.
What happens?
The Prophet advised him to simply state clearly that he intends no deception in his transactions. It's a simple yet powerful act, making your intentions known, ensuring that there's no room for misunderstanding or suspicion.
It's a reminder that ethical conduct isn't just about following rules. It's about being transparent, communicating clearly, and acting with integrity in all our dealings.
And these principles resonate strongly with modern business ethics. We have laws against misleading advertising, fraudulent activities. They're all rooted in this fundamental idea of honesty and transparency.
It's fascinating to see how these ancient teachings anticipated so many of the ethical challenges we grapple with in today's business world.
It's a testament to their enduring wisdom. The principles of fairness, transparency, and honesty are timeless and essential for building a just and trustworthy marketplace.
Now, beyond these principles of ethical conduct, there's another concept that really stood out to me, the idea that profit follows responsibility.
Ah, yes, that's a core principle in Islamic finance. It's all about aligning risk and reward, ensuring that those who bear the responsibility also reap the benefits, and vice versa.
It makes intuitive sense, but how does it play out in practice?
There are several examples in the Hadith. For instance, if a slave jointly owned by multiple people earns wages while working for just one of the owners, the profit belongs to the owner who bore the responsibility of employing him.
So it's not just about splitting the profits evenly. It's about taking into account who took on the risk, who provided the opportunity for those earnings.
Exactly. It clarifies ownership and ensures that rewards are commensurate with the level of responsibility taken. There's also the example of a slave with hidden defects being returned to the seller.
So in that case, the seller who concealed the defects bears the responsibility and therefore the loss.
Precisely. It incentivizes honesty and due diligence. If you're going to profit from a transaction, you need to be transparent and accountable for the quality of the goods or services you're providing. And then there were the rulings about disagreements on prices, where the statement of the owner takes precedence, or the option to annul the sale becomes available.
Again, it's about clarifying responsibility, providing a framework for resolving disputes fairly.
Right. The overall message is that you can't just reap the rewards without taking on the corresponding risks and responsibilities. It's about aligning your actions with your expectations of profit.
This principle feels incredibly relevant today, especially with the complexities of modern finance. Think about investments, partnerships, all the different ways we engage in financial transactions. Understanding who is responsible for what, who bears the risk, and who is entitled to the reward is crucial.
Absolutely. This principle of profit follows responsibility provides a valuable ethical framework for navigating those complexities.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. The Hadith in Sunan Abu Dawud emphasize protecting the vulnerable, ensuring transparency, prohibiting deception, and this fascinating idea that profit is intrinsically linked to responsibility. What's striking you the most about how these principles come together to create an ethical economic framework?
It's like a puzzle. Each principle fits together to create this bigger picture of an economic system that's not just about profit, but about, social well-being, about ethical conduct at every level.
And it's not just theoretical, it gets into the nitty-gritty of very specific situations. Like, how do you handle loans? What about things that are more communal shared resources?
See, Sunan Abu Dawud doesn't shy away from those practical matters. When it comes to loans, the message is crystal clear: honor your commitments. There's a hadith that emphasizes repaying a loan and returning a borrowed she-camel, even specifically mentioning one lent for milking.
So it's not just about the big-ticket items. It's about being trustworthy in all our dealings, no matter how small.
Exactly. It's about cultivating a culture of integrity. And it's not just a one-way street. Remember the story of Safwan lending coats of mail to the Prophet?
Yes, even in the midst of war, he not only lent them, but also told the prophet not to worry if any were lost in battle.
Yeah. It's a testament to the depth of trust and selflessness these teachings foster. even when material possessions could mean the difference between victory and defeat. The emphasis is on upholding one's word and prioritizing the well-being of others.
It sets such a high bar for how we should approach financial agreements.
It does. And that commitment to integrity is further emphasized in another hadith that commands, "Pay the deposit to him who deposited it with you, and do not betray him who betrays you."
It's a powerful reminder that ethical conduct isn't conditional. It's not about reciprocating someone else's behavior.
Hmm.
Even if someone have wronged you, you're still obligated to act with integrity.
It's about maintaining your own moral compass, not letting someone else's actions dictate your own. It's challenging, but it's a vital principle.
So whether it's a loan, a deposit, or any kind of financial agreement, Islamic teachings emphasize honoring commitments, upholding trust, and acting with integrity even when it's difficult.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that our financial interactions aren't just transactions. They're opportunities to build relationships based on mutual respect and trustworthiness.
Now, moving beyond individual transactions, Sunan Abu Dawud also delves into how we relate to resources that are more communal.
That's right. There's a hadith that states Muslims share common rights to grass, water, and fire.
Especially in the context of the Arabian Peninsula, where those resources were vital for survival, it makes sense that they'd be treated as shared assets.
Exactly. It highlights the importance of responsible resource management, recognizing that these essential elements aren't just for individual gain, but for the well-being of the entire community.
It's like a precursor to modern concepts of environmental sustainability and shared public resources.
I see that connection too. And this principle extends beyond physical resources. Think about knowledge infrastructure, public services. The idea is that certain things should be accessible to all members of society, regardless of their individual wealth or status.
It's about fostering a sense of shared responsibility and ensuring that everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
Precisely. It challenges us to think beyond our immediate self-interest and consider the well-being of the community as a whole.
Now, along with shared resources, Sunan Abu Dawud also addresses the ethics of giving, specifically gifts and donations.
Yes, and the emphasis here is on sincerity. Giving should come from a genuine desire to benefit others, not as a means of manipulation or control.
There's that vivid hadith that compares retracting a gift to a dog eating its vomit.
It's a stark image, isn't it? It really drives home the point that once you've given something freely, taking it back is considered highly distasteful.
It's about the purity of intention, the selflessness of true generosity.
And while the general rule is that gifts shouldn't be taken back, there's an exception made for fathers regarding gifts given to their children.
That makes sense, given the unique dynamics of that relationship. Parents sometimes need to make adjustments, perhaps for practical reasons or as part of guiding their children.
Right. It acknowledges the nuances of family relationships while still upholding the broader principle of sincere giving.
Finally, we come to the realm of family and inheritance. What stood out to you in those sections?
The emphasis on fairness and justice, particularly within the family structure. There are hadith about treating children equally, especially sons, and ensuring that inheritances are distributed according to Islamic guidelines.
It's about preventing favoritism and upholding a clear system of rights and responsibilities.
And then there's the concept of life tenancy, also known as usufruct.
I was curious about that. How does it work?
Well, it's a way to provide for someone's needs without permanently transferring ownership of property. Someone might be granted the right to use and benefit from a property during their lifetime, but the ownership ultimately remains with the original owner or their heirs.
So it's like a temporary arrangement that ensures someone has a place to live or a source of income without disinheriting the rightful heirs.
Yeah, exactly. And the Hadith provide clear guidelines for how this arrangement should be structured, ensuring that it aligns with Islamic inheritance laws and doesn't create any unfair advantages.
So even within the family structure, there's this emphasis on clear guidelines, fairness, and a balance between individual needs and the overall principles of inheritance.
Absolutely. It's all part of creating a system where wealth is managed responsibly, ethically, and with a deep consideration for the well-being of all those involved.
Wow, what an incredible journey through the world of wages and earnings as seen through the lens of early Islamic teachings.
It's amazing how these centuries-old principles offer such relevant insights into ethical conduct, social responsibility, and building a just and equitable economic system.
It's like a blueprint for living a life where our financial pursuits are aligned with our spiritual values, where our earnings are a reflection of our commitment to honesty, fairness, and compassion.
Beautifully said. I think the key takeaway here is that Islam views wealth not just as a material possession, but as an integral part of a holistic ethical framework.
It's about recognizing that our financial choices have consequences not just for ourselves, but for our families, our communities, and the world around us.
It's a call to live with intention, to consider the impact of our actions, and to strive to create a world where financial success is achieved ethically and contributes to the well-being of all.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights and guiding us through this fascinating exploration of Sunan Abu Dawud.
It's been my pleasure. I hope our listeners will continue to delve into these teachings and discover the timeless wisdom they hold.
And to our listeners, if this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, we encourage you to explore further. Perhaps research specific rulings that caught your attention, or look into the contemporary applications of Islamic finance.
There's a wealth of knowledge to be gained from these teachings, and they offer valuable insights for anyone seeking to live a more ethical and fulfilling life.
Until next time, may your pursuit of knowledge and understanding continue to illuminate your path.
And may your earnings be a source of blessing and your actions a reflection of the wisdom and compassion you've cultivated.